Hi, I'm Emily and I'm the Castle Girl. Today I'm at Stirling Castle. Stirling Castle sits defiantly proud overlooking the city of Stirling, atop of an intrusive volcanic crag of rock in the heart of Scotland. It overlooks the River Forth at the point where the southerly Scottish lowlands meet the mountainous highlands to the north. The now city of Stirling lies 37 miles northwest of Edinburgh and 26 miles northeast of Glasgow in central Scotland. Once a market town that developed through farming of the nearby fertile lands, the medieval town of Stirling developed around the royal fortress. For over 3 centuries, Stirling Old Bridge was the lowest crossing point over the River Forth, and therefore had a tactical position to guard. Because of its strategical position, Stirling became known as the gateway to the Highlands. It was described by the poet Alexander Smith as Stirling, like a huge brooch, clasps highlands and lowlands together. Assigned to armies marching either north or south, and mainly attributed to Robert the Bruce, a centuries-old saying, "He who holds Stirling holds Scotland," was a statement used as a warning about Stirling Castle. The first records of a fortification on the site date back to Alexander, nicknamed the Fierce, who reigned as King of Scotland from 1107 until he died in 1124. It was Alexander in 1120 who founded a royal charter on the castle site and built a chapel. During the reign of his successor David I, who was King of Scotland between 1124 to 1153, Stirling Castle was used as an administration centre, and Stirling itself became a royal borough. King William I, also known as William the Lion because of his flag, which was a red lion rampant with a forked tail on a yellow background, inherited the throne from his grandfather David after his older brother Malcolm IV died in December 1165. William arranged the first Treaty of Alliance between Scotland and France in 1168. This was against Henry II. He was captured by Henry's troops in 1174 at the Battle of Alnwick. This led to the Treaty of Falaise, which was in force until 1189. William died at Stirling Castle in 1214. Until the death of Alexander III in 1286, Stirling Castle was a central site for royal administration in Scotland. It was Alexander's granddaughter, Margaret, Maid of Norway, who was born in 1283, who succeeded him to the Scottish throne. She died allegedly in 1290. Born in Norway and dying so young, she never stayed in Scotland. This led to the Guardians of Scotland asking Edward I of England to reach a settlement. Stirling and all other castles in Scotland were in Edward's control now, and he appointed John Balliol as the next king, who reigned from 1292 to 1296. Among the other 13 contenders was Robert de Bruce, the 5th Lord of Annandale and also the grandfather of Robert the Bruce. These events led to the first wars of Scottish independence and eventually the Battle of Stirling Bridge. Initiated by William Wallace and Andrew Maury, in September 1297, the castle was in the hands of the Scots again. In July 1298, Edward's army defeated the Scottish army led by William Wallace at the Battle of Falkirk. It was the Scottish troops, along with Robert the Bruce, who recaptured the castle in 1299, forcing the English garrison to surrender. In 1303, the castle gatehouse was destroyed by Edward of England again by a large trebuchet called Warwolf. This was made in Scotland by Edward and was believed to be the biggest trebuchet ever made. It was a Scottish knight, William Oliphant, who was the governor of the castle, who eventually surrendered to the English in 1304. He had been imprisoned in England in 1296 after the Battle of Dunbar. Being freed in September 1297, he fought for Edward but switched loyalty to the Scots again. He was imprisoned after the siege in the Tower of London, after all of Scotland swore loyalty to Edward except William Wallace. Edward I died in 1307, and by this time Robert the Bruce was crowned King of Scotland. King Robert had won power over most of Scotland in a series of successful battles ending on the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314, where he won out over a large English army led by Edward II of England. This marked a new era for the Scottish kingdom being independent once again. However, after the battle, Bruce had the castle slighted to avoid it being held by future invaders. In 1332, Edward Balliol invaded Scotland in his bid to claim the Scottish throne from David II, who was 8 years old at the time, and crowned king in 1329, after his father Robert I died. This led to the Second War of Scottish Independence. By 1336, the English were controlling Stirling Castle, where modifications were overseen by Commander Thomas Rokeby. The castle at this time was still mainly a wooden construction. The castle was retaken by Robert Stewart, King David's nephew, in a siege around 1341. During this time, Maurice Murray was appointed the castle's keeper, and he enforced it greatly. Robert de Forsyth was appointed the castle's keeper in 1360 and passed the role on to his son John, who passed it on to his grandson William in 1399. During this time, Robert II was King of Scotland from 1371 until his death in 1390. Robert succeeded the throne after his uncle David II died in 1371, with no heir to the throne. He was the son of Marjorie, the daughter of Robert the Bruce, and Walter Stewart. He was the first monarch, giving rise to the House of Stewart. The earliest part of the castle, the North Gate, that has survived and that we can see today, were built during the reign of the early Stuart kings between 1371 and 1406. The castle was passed to James I's wife, Joan Beaufort, as part of a marriage settlement in 1424. She took shelter here after her husband's murder in 1437. with her son James II, who succeeded the throne at the age of 6. His son to Mary of Guelders, James III, reigned from 1460 after his father's death. James was born at Stirling Castle and commissioned work on the Chapel Royal and the castle gardens. He himself died at the Battle of Sauchieburn in 1488. Most of the present building we see were built by the succeeding Stewart kings, James IV, V and James VI of Scotland and First of England, between the late 15th century and the 17th centuries. During this era, Stirling was a principal royal centre. There are a mix of English, French as well as German architectural styles which reflects the influences the Stewart dynasty were led by. James IV commissioned the building of the King's Old Building, the Great Hall, and the four-work main entrance between 1488 and 1513. But he died before this was completed. After his death at the Battle of Flodden in 1488, it was James V who continued the building work his father had started. He also added the Royal Palace as the main centre of the estate, built by Sir James Hamilton of Finnart and stonemasons from France. James V continued and expanded his father's building programme, creating the centrepiece of the castle, the Royal Palace. James V died in 1542 before he could see the finished work he commissioned. This was left to his widow, Mary of Guise. James' successor was the young Mary Queen of Scots, who was brought to Stirling Castle for safeguard from Henry VIII. Mary was crowned in the castle in September 1543. Mary and her mother resided at Stirling Castle until she was sent to France in 1548. Mary of Guise continued her regency in Scotland and added artillery fortifications which form the foundations of the present outer defences. For this she hired Lorenzo Pomarelli, an Italian architect and military engineer. Mary Queen of Scots returned to Scotland in 1561, after her mother had died, and her first husband, Francis, the Dauphin of France, died in 1560. She married Henry Stewart, Lord Darnley, in 1565, and visited Stirling Castle regularly. In December 1566, her son James VI was baptised here. She arranged entertainment to mark the occasion, including a firework display and a masquerade ball. Mary and Darnley were estranged at this time, and he was not present at the celebrations. It was her young son's guardian, the Earl of Mar, who was made governor of the castle at this time. After Darnley was found dead under mysterious circumstances, Mary married James Hepburn, the Earl of Bothwell. This led to an unfortunate chain of events for the Queen, which resulted in her being forced to abdicate in favour of her young son. James was crowned King of Scotland in July 1567 and was raised at Stirling Castle by the Earl of Mar's wife, Annabel Murray. James was kept at Stirling Castle by supporters of his reign, while those who opposed him in favour of his mother collected at Edinburgh Castle under the direction of William Kirkcaldy of Grange. In 1571, a raid to take control of Stirling Castle and the young king was arranged by Grange, but failed. Alexander Erskine of Gogar was the guardian of James and the castle in 1578, but he was forced to leave after his son was killed during a siege by James Douglas IV, Earl of Morton's supporters in the April of that year. Archibald Douglas, the 8th Earl of Angus and the 5th Earl of Morton, along with John Erskine, forced control of the castle around 1583. They later surrendered to King James when he arrived with a large army. James married Anne of Denmark in 1589, and she gave birth to her first child Henry at the castle in December 1594. During this time, James had the castle, which was in a state of ruin, be restored, and the chapel royal was built for Henry's baptism. The family resided at Stirling Castle until James succeeded Elizabeth I to the throne in 1603. He then became the first king of Scotland, England and Ireland. And they moved to London. After 1603, Stirling Castle was hardly used by royalty. It was used mainly as a military base and a prison during the 17th century. The castle's roofs and some facilities went under reparations by the architect James Murray for the return visit of James when he stayed at Stirling for a short time during July 1617. Most restorative work was carried out on the gardens and the chapel royal around 1625 for the visit of James' son and successor to the throne, Charles I. Charles didn't visit until 1633 during his coronation in Scotland and only stayed for a short while. Charles I was executed in 1649 after being convicted for treason, and his son Charles II was crowned King of Scotland in January 1651. He resided at Stirling Castle before this in 1650. Scotland's acceptance of Charles II as king led to the Battle of Dunbar in 1650 between Oliver Cromwell's New Model Army and the Scottish Army commanded by David Leslie, where the Royalists were defeated. After Scotland's defeat at the Battle of Worcester, Charles fled to France and the English took control of Stirling Castle. This was the last time that a monarch stayed at Stirling Castle. You can still see signs of damage to the Great Hall and chapel during a siege at this time. The restoration of the Stewart monarchy in 1660 saw Charles return to England as the king. However, he never returned to Stirling Castle. Instead, the castle was used as a prison, housing Covenanters under the governing of John Erskine, the 6th Earl of Mar. In 1681, it was visited by James, Duke of Albany, before becoming King James VII of Scotland and 2nd of England in 1685. During this period, the castle was being used as a military base, housing a garrison and artillery. John Erskine, the 6th Earl of Mar, was keeper at the castle until the accession to the throne of the Hanoverian George I in 1714. Deprived of his role as Scottish Secretary, he began the Jacobite Rising in 1715. This was in favour of James Stewart, the son of King James II and 7th of England, Scotland and Ireland, nicknamed the Old Pretender. John Campbell, the second Earl of Argyll, and his troops quickly seized the castle during this rebellion led by Mar, en route to the battle at Sheriffmuir in November 1617. The battle, although not lost, ended the uprising. Charles Edward Stewart, the son of James Stewart, also known as Bonnie Prince Charlie or the Young Pretender, marched his troops past Stirling Castle in 1745 en route to Edinburgh. This was during the second Jacobite uprising. However, he didn't have the resources or the time to retake Stirling. During the 19th and 20th centuries, Stirling Castle was the property of the War Office between 1857 and 1964 and used as barracks. The Great Hall and Chapel were converted to accommodate those personnel. New buildings were built to house a prison and a powder house for explosives. Royal visitors to the castle at this time included Queen Victoria in 1842 and in 1859 Albert Edward, the Prince of Wales at this time. The castle has underwent over 30 years of major conservation and restoration work to reflect the splendour of its Renaissance grandeur era during the 1500s. With its military history, the castle is also home to the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders Regimental Museum. With exhibits detailing the Crimean Wars, Boer Wars, World War I and World War II. The castle is now in the care of Historic Environment Scotland. Thanks for watching, and I look forward to visiting a castle near you. Bye!